Some of the worst epidemics and pandemics in history have doomed whole civilizations and brought once powerful nations to their knees, killing millions and so deadly that they changed the course of history. In this video, we have picked up top 5 pandemics in history. So without further ado, let's get started. Top 5 pandemics in history. Number 5. Plague of Athens, 430 BC. Around 430 BC, not long after a war between Athens and Sparta began, an epidemic ravaged the people of Athens and lasted for 5 years. Some estimates put the death toll as high as 100,000 people. The Greek historian Thucydides wrote that people in good health were all of a sudden attacked by violent heats in the head and redness and inflammation in the eyes, the inward parts such as the throat or tongue becoming bloody and emitting an unnatural and fetid breath. What exactly this epidemic was has long been a source of debate among scientists. A number of diseases have been put forward as possibilities, including typhoid fever and Ebola. Many scholars believe that overcrowding caused by the war exacerbated the epidemic. Sparta's army was stronger, forcing the Athenians to take refuge behind a series of fortifications called the Long Walls that protected their city. Despite the epidemic, the war continued on, not ending until 404 BC, when Athens was forced to capitulate to Sparta. Number 4. Cholera, 1817. The story of the cholera pandemics of the 19th century shows the beginnings of modern epidemiological practices, as well as a growing understanding that contaminated food and water can be vectors for disease. Also, it's got Jon Snow in it, and this Jon Snow, unlike the Game of Thrones character, happened to know a lot. The first cholera pandemic occurred in 1817. It began with contaminated rice in India, and from there, it spread throughout the Middle East and Asia via trade routes. By 1824, the pandemic had subsided, but a second one was close on its heels. Beginning 5 years later this time, though, cholera spread as far as Europe and the Americas. This second pandemic didn't officially end until 1851, which meant a long 20 years or so of on and off cholera outbreaks in various countries. Number 3. The Spanish Flu, 1918 to 1919. The Spanish flu is the 20th century pandemic people seem to have compared to the COVID-19 crisis the most. Why? There are a couple of parallels to consider. Although SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, is not the same as influenza, both viruses spread via respiratory droplets. Despite its name, the influenza pandemic that occurred in 1918 didn't originate in Spain. The Spanish flu is referred to as such because journalists from Madrid were the ones who brought it to the world's attention. Like other strains of influenza, the Spanish flu caused respiratory symptoms, fevers, chills, and fatigue. In the initial wave of infection in the spring of 1918, it led to pneumonia for some, but many others recovered fully. The death toll wasn't very high at first. However, one characteristic that set this flu apart from others was that it infected and killed people who were otherwise young and healthy, notably soldiers fighting in World War I. It's not clear where exactly the virus originated, but the first known case in the U.S. was in March 1918 at Camp Funston in Fort Riley, Kansas. The disease spread quickly among soldiers who were living and traveling in close quarters. 36% of troops in the U.S. Army and around 40% of individuals serving in the Navy were ultimately infected. In the U.S. alone, 670,000 people lost their lives. Worldwide, the Spanish flu infected 500 million people and killed between 50 and 100 million people. Number 2. The Plague of Justinian. In the year 541 AD, rats on Egyptian grain boats brought a pestilence to the Eastern Roman Empire that would ultimately leave approximately 25 million people dead. The plague of Justinian quickly tore through the empire. Even the emperor himself, Justinian I, for whom the plague was named, contracted the disease. While he lived, many didn't, with modern scholars estimating that at one point as many as 5,000 people died per day in Constantinople, the empire's capital. By its end, about 40% of the city's population was dead, so many and so quickly that the bodies were left in piles, joined by about 1/4 of the eastern Mediterranean. Modern experts believe the outbreak to be the first recorded case of the bubonic plague. Number 1. The Black Death. If I asked you to imagine a plague, my guess would be that you'd picture something like the "Bring Out Your Dead" scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, a bleak and filthy medieval cityscape where everyone is sick or dying. The fact that the bubonic plague devastated most of the world back in the 1300s, killing 25 to 50 million people in Europe alone, certainly cemented its place in popular culture as the archetype for devastating disease. The Black Death swept through China, India, Persia, Syria, and Egypt in the early 1340s and arrived in Europe via its ports several years later. In 1347, infected sailors left the Genoese outpost of Kaffa and landed in Constantinople, Istanbul, Sicily, and Marseille, carrying the plague with them. Similarly, a different strain of Y. pesti entered Italy through Genoa in 1348. Over the next few years, the bubonic plague spread throughout Europe, reaching as far as Scotland and Norway. By the time 1353 rolled around, Europe had lost around half its population. Surprisingly, the bubonic plague is still around today, sometimes occurring in rural areas in the western United States, though it's more common in parts of Africa and Asia. Symptoms of the bubonic plague in particular include a sudden onset fever, headache, chills, weakness, and one or more swollen, tender, and painful lymph nodes. Luckily, per the CDC, modern-day antibiotics are successful in treating the plague. That wraps up the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay notified about more videos about our amazing world. I'll see you next time. Till then, peace out.